the Tuesday, April 14th, 2020 regular business meeting of the EBMUD Board of Directors. Due to COVID-19 and in accordance with Alameda County Health Order 2004, which was issued March 31st, 2020, and with the Governor's Executive Order N-2920, which suspends portions of the Brown Act, this meeting will be conducted via teleconference only. In compliance with said orders, a physical location has not been provided for this meeting. These measures will only apply during the period in which state or local public health officials have imposed or recommended social distancing. The Planning and Legislative Human Resource the Planning Committee and the Legislative Human Resources Finance Administration Committees met earlier today and will report under item 14. Okay. So we'll do roll call. All of us are on teleconference, which is Director Coleman, Katz, Linney, McIntosh, Mellon, and Patterson, as well as myself. Madam Secretary, if you would please call the roll.
Directors Coleman.
Present.
Katz.
Finance Committee
Present.
met earlier today will report under item 14.
Hold on 1 minute. If anybody is on teleconference from the public, can you please mute your phone? Thank you. All right. Director Linney?
Here.
McIntosh?
Here.
Mellon?
Present.
Patterson?
Here.
President Young?
I am here, and if everyone on Teams that is not speaking could also go on mute, that would be great. Okay. We will now do, I don't know how we do this, but just everybody stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. And do it at your own, however. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, these things don't work well when everybody's talking, so, okay. Alex, I believe we are now at the presentation.
Yes, thank you, board members, members of the public. This is an opportunity to recognize district receipt of another award. This is the Operations and Environmental Performance Award that we've received from the National Association of Clean Water Agencies, or NACWA. And we've received it along with others who are involved in the district's wet weather collaboration for a group partnership called the East Bay Regional Wet Weather Collaboration to significantly reduce infiltration and inflow. And you all know that that's part of a regional effort that we have going on. EBMUD and its 7 satellite collection system agencies have been working together to reduce infiltration and inflow and minimize the use of EBMUD's 3 wet weather facilities. Since 2014, this work has occurred under a framework of a collaboratively negotiated consent decree with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and 2 non-governmental organizations. EBMUD and the satellites have implemented an asset management-based approach to reduce infiltration and inflow at the source rather than spending significantly more capital to design, construct, and operate new storage and or treatment facilities. This collaborative approach has achieved the following. 430 miles of leak-free private sewer laterals were verified, 144 miles of sewer collection system mains were repaired, 300 million gallons of urban runoff were diverted and treated, 210 leaks in the collection system were identified and repaired. All of this work was made possible through close collaboration across multiple agencies to implement complex projects. For example, as part of the Pump Station Q flow reversal project, the district and the city of Berkeley worked closely to navigate various difficult site constraints and, in the end, successfully complete the project in November of 2019, a year ahead of schedule. We do not have staff here because we are meeting virtually, but would like to recognize that this collaborative effort involved the following staff: Sue Berg, Senior Chemist; Alicia Chakrabarty, Manager of Wastewater Environmental Services; Christopher Dinsmore, Senior Civil Engineer; Phoebe Groh, Supervising Wastewater Control Representative; Rebecca Overacre, Associate Civil Engineer; Daniel Sue, Senior Wastewater Control Representative, Inspector; Angelie Strotter, Wastewater Control Representative; Paula Truong, Laboratory Technician 3, and Christina Zungia, Associate Civil Engineer. Please congratulate me virtually, or please join me in congratulating virtually the staff for a job well done. Thank you.
All righty. Next up, thank you everybody for your great work on that. Next up, we have announcements from closed session. There were no announcements from closed session. Public comment. If there are members of the public who have called in and wish to speak on an item that is not on the agenda, the secretary will take your name. Hey, Madam Secretary?
Yes.
How are we handling public comment on other items on the agenda?
They speak at the time the agenda item is presented.
So I should cue that up on each item since
Your
we won't
notes.
have cards?
Right.
Okay. Okay, so if there are members who wish to speak on an item that is not on the agenda, the secretary will take your name one at a time, and I will call them in groupings of alphabet so that you can state your name and affiliation, if applicable, and the topic that you'll be speaking on. You'll have 3 minutes after the secretary calls your name. If we have an abundance of speakers, I have discretion to amend the time accordingly. The secretary will, after she's taken the names, will state each speaker's name and cue you to speak when it is your turn, and also tell you when your time has concluded. When we get to specific agenda items, we will follow the same process, and you will be heard when the item is up for consideration. If you are not speaking under public comment but are on the line, please mute your phone to minimize background noise. Is there anyone on the line for public comment, last name ending A through F, as in Frank? Okay, is there anyone for public comment, letters, last name beginning with the letter G to L? Okay, is there anyone for public comment with the last name beginning with M through R, as in Robert? Okay, and finally, is there anyone for public comment with the last name beginning with the letters S as in Sam through Z as in zebra? Okay, so at this time, there are no members of the public wishing to comment. We will call for public comment as each item comes up. We'll now move on to the consent calendar. And on this teleconference, roll call votes will be required for all items. And on the consent calendar, we have 10 items for consideration. Before we vote, are there any items that need to be pulled for discussion, which would include any items that I believe that members of the public would like to pull from consent for further consideration? Okay, hearing none. Do I have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
Yes, John Coleman will make the motion.
Frank Mellon will second.
Okay, Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll?
on agenda items 1 through 10. Directors Coleman,
Yes.
Katz,
Yes.
Lenny,
Yes.
McIntosh,
Yes.
Mellon,
Yes.
Patterson, Director Patterson,
Hang on a second.
you might be on mute.
He shouldn't be. But he is. I don't know why.
He's on mute.
Okay.
And President Young.
Hello?
And
Hello?
there he is. There he is.
Hi, we just voted on the consent calendar, items 1 through 10. How do you vote, Director Patterson?
I voted aye.
Okay. And President Young?
Yes.
All right. Okay.
Okay. We'll now move on to the consent calendar passes. We will now move on to determination and discussion. Item 11, the legislative update. Marlene Dumaine will be providing an oral report. Take it away, Marlene.
Thank you. We do have a written report for you with 3 state bills with a position recommendation. And I wanted to start on the state side and put these bills and what's happening in context. And then once we're done with the state, then I'd like to move over to the federal. There's, as I'm sure you're aware, quite a bit going on at the federal level. In the written ledge report, we have a support recommendation for SB 928, SB 929, and SB 930. These are the validations bills that you see each year. And I wanted to provide a little context. We're now in mid-April, and normally, you would see a lot more bills coming through for consideration of a position. And things have changed. The legislature went out on a recess in March, and they have since extended that recess to early May. They've been continually amending bills, but they are not having policy committee hearings. There are about 2,600 bills that are active right now. This year, there were about 2,200 introduced and then 400 remaining from last year. And a lot of members have been proceeding under the theory that until we know what's going on, we need to keep amending, keep moving forward. So we've been tracking the amendments, but fully aware that things are going to change. The budget is not the budget that we saw in January. In January, there was a very healthy state budget. More money was proposed to go into the rainy day fund, and there was also expected to be quite a bit of discretionary spending for the legislature for their proposals. And in recent weeks, we've seen announcements that we're now looking at a workload budget, which means any new proposals are likely not happening. Anything that was proposed in the January budget is likely not happening, and everything.
You are the only participant in the conference. Please press any key on your keypad to remain in the conference.
That costs money is going to get caught up in this budget piece. If it costs money, unless it's a key priority, it's likely not going anywhere. So then the question becomes, what are the key priorities going to be? The legislature has got to determine that. We all know COVID is a key priority and will continue to be so. What else? Likely wildfire, likely housing. The scope of those conversations, if they remain priorities, will be very, very different today and tomorrow than they were or would have been in January. Right now, the legislature is planning to do some hearings on budget. The Senate is meeting this Thursday to talk about COVID spending to date. The Assembly is scheduled to meet next week. And this is budget subcommittees. It's not the full bodies that are meeting. The Senate is planning to meet remotely. The Assembly is planning to come meet in person. They are both trying to figure out how they're going to conduct business when they come back, if they come back in May. Job one, when they do come back, is going to be that budget piece. There are constitutional deadlines. They've got a June deadline for the state budget, and they have a complicating factor in that the tax returns are now not due until July. So that revenue piece is not going to be finalized by the time they have to do their budget. So we're probably going to see two budget sessions. There'll be the June immediate budget, and then we'll also likely see a pretty significant budget discussion in August. So what this means as far as bills is we're proceeding under the theory that what we bring to you needs to be in the priority category for the legislature so that you're spending your time on bills that are real and have a chance to move, bills that are important and that have a direct nexus to district operations. So why these three validations? I realize they are really routine. We see them all the time. We see them every year, but they are important. They're important to protect the integrity of bond issuance. And that, for that reason, we're bringing them for you today for position consideration.
Okay. Is there anything from the legislative committee to add to that on the state side before taking the motion
Sure.
on the state bills?
We met this morning, all three of us, and we all agreed on supporting the three validation bills. So I'll move the item.
Okay. Was that Bill making the second?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I have a motion from Director Coleman, a second from Director Patterson. Are there any questions or comments on the motion? Are there any public comments on the motion? Okay. Hearing none, let's have a roll call vote, please.
Directors Coleman,
Yes.
Katz,
Yes.
Director Lenny,
Yes.
McIntosh,
Yes.
Mellon,
Yes.
Patterson,
Yes.
President Young.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Are you ready for the federal piece?
Yes.
Okay. Congress has been very active, and they are continuing to do a lot of work. To date, we have seen 3 COVID relief bills enacted, and we've provided information on each of those 3 in various forms. There are a few carryover pieces from those 3 bills that we are engaging both at the congressional level and at the state level. One is in the second relief bill, which was H.R. 6201. That one was enacted March 18th. There is a provision to provide the private sector with a payroll tax credit to compensate them for the increased leave under FFA. And there was an express exclusion for public agencies. So public agencies cannot get that payroll tax credit to reimburse them for those costs. A lot of folks have recognized that that's an issue, including members of Congress. We have officially, through a letter, requested that public agencies be included in that tax credit as they're looking at additional relief packages. The other issue is in the last measure, which was H.R. 748, enacted on March 27th. There is a $150 billion COVID relief fund that is intended to provide direct assistance to public agencies. 15.3 billion of that would come to California. The language has been very unclear as to whether or not local government also means special districts like East Bay MUD. We have requested clarification on that issue at the federal level, and there are 2 pieces to this. One is some money would be dispersed federally. The other is some money will come to the state for disbursement. So we have done parallel requests, one to the governor and one to our congressional representatives, about ensuring that special districts like East Bay MUD qualify. We learned last night that the U.S. Treasury Department issued guidance on the federal disbursement of their portion of the money, and their guidance is very clear that it is intended to only go to cities and counties. So now our focus will remain at the state level to see if we can get something there. Moving to the next package, Congress is looking at what they're calling CARES Act 2 right now. And then there's also going to be a stimulus effort. Initially, those efforts were going to be combined. Right now, it looks like they're not. So the immediate focus is CARES Act 2, which is more relief. Then we move to stimulus, which would be more infrastructure related. That is likely next month, June, somewhere in that time frame. So looking at CARES Act 2, no bill as of yet, a lot of conversation about what would go in there. Where this started was the Senate Republicans said they wanted to increase the small business assistance. $350 billion has been provided to date. There's a recognition that there needs to be more, so they're proposing $250 billion more. Their proposal was just that. Both the House and Senate Democrats have said, no, it needs to go further than that. So other provisions that are being talked about, and this is not the universe, I'm focusing on the provisions that we're looking at with regard to East Bay MUD. One is addressing that tax credit issue from the second bill and extending that tax credit to public agencies. So that at least is in the mix, may or may not happen. Another is low-income ratepayer assistance. And the amounts that are being talked about are $1.5 billion to $3 billion nationwide. That is getting quite a bit of traction. I saw some chatter on that again yesterday. Never give up. Request to have any additional relief going to local government to extend down to the special district level. And then something that came up last week, which is recognition of those essential workers that are on the front line. That one, there are multiple proposals. That one is morphing quite a bit. The first proposal came from Senate Minority Leader Schumer, and he's calling it his Heroes Fund. And it is about enhanced pay for frontline workers and hiring bonuses for the recruitment of frontline workers. There's also a proposal out that is a joint proposal with Warren and Khanna, and it goes further. I'm just going to read to you some of the protections that are in theirs, and they're calling it a Bill of Rights. They're looking for health and safety protections, premium compensation, so that's similar to the Schumer approach, protections for collective bargaining agreements, universal paid sick leave, family and medical leave, whistleblower protection, an end to worker misclassification, health care security, support for child care, treat workers as experts, and hold corporations accountable for protecting workers. Both of these are, we're viewing in the larger category of providing enhanced benefits for essential frontline workers. So we have had a written request in to Congress for including ratepayer assistance including funding for special districts and addressing that tax credit issue. And we're refreshing that request to add a request that as they look at adding protections for essential frontline workers, that water and wastewater utility workers are essential frontline workers and should be included in any enhanced package that Congress agrees to. The timing on this CARES number 2 it was going to be yesterday. Now it's potentially Thursday. I checked a little while ago to see if there was a bill. We still have not seen a bill. So I think we have to assume it's Thursday, as early as Thursday. They're really moving quickly. They're moving faster than I've ever seen Congress move on anything. And then once this is done, they are adaptively managing, much like our governor. They're looking at how are these packages going? What else do we need to do? So that leaves the door open for another relief package after this, and then moving to infrastructure. So infrastructure is still on the table. It's just getting moved out while they address these immediate relief needs. Any questions?
I have a comment. Go ahead, John.
Quick question, Thanks, Doug. Margaret. Quick question on the infrastructure. Are they going to be looking at shovel-ready projects only, or is there a timeline? At one time, I thought I heard that Speaker Pelosi was talking about a 5-year time frame to get stuff done. So that's one. Is it shovel-ready? What's the time frame from when it's enacted to spending the money? And then 2, not as much for you, Marlene, but for Alex, how many projects do we have, and what are the dollar amounts that we may have that fall in that category?
You want me to start?
Yeah, sure.
So right now, they haven't decided on an approach. The conversation has really been, are we talking programmatic or are we talking project specific? And that gets down to, are they going to do it much like they've been doing the appropriations requests, where instead of the old earmark days, you ask under set programs and then you compete for funding? Or are they going to do an earmark approach? Also, what are the bookends? We don't know yet. We've seen in the relief packages money for specific industries so far, like transportation has already gotten a big chunk of money. They've been clear that they want to include water and wastewater infrastructure, but that's the extent of the level of detail that's been agreed upon so far.
Great, thank you. And then, Alex, maybe it can be provided in a written memo, because the question came to mind when Marlene was giving the presentation. How many projects do we have that are programmatic or specific? What are the dollar amounts?
We can provide sort of a summary of the capital program that might be helpful in this area.
Great, thank you.
Are there questions from board members?
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead, Doug.
So I was just curious, the $250 billion, I've heard that thrown around. Is that, that kind of locked in, or is that just a trial balloon? Could it go more or less, or what's like there?
The latest I heard on that was that the House Democrats were willing to accept that number with conditions. And the main conditions, I'm sure there are others, but the main would be that the money flow to minority-owned businesses and the small rural businesses very, very quickly, because that first 350 went out really quickly, and before anybody had a chance to react, a lot of those businesses that don't have resources were not able to compete for the money.
Yeah, okay. And then for the, if you said it before, I'm sorry if I missed it, but the stimulus legislation, have they been throwing around any numbers on that?
Not anything that is set. It's just been, we want to do infrastructure, and then it's getting pushed out. So I've not heard a good dollar number on that one yet.
And then, do you have any comments? I mean, it sounds like the president is not really following or not being accountable on how the money is being spent. And I'm just kind of curious, when these bills get passed so quickly and everything, whether these just become giant slush funds or whether they're actually, any hope that they're going to go to what they're intended to go for.
I think that's a great question. That has been a real focal point of conversation. I know when the airline money was discussed, the idea was if and this was coming from the Democrats, if we're going to provide funding for an industry, that industry better not be furloughing workers, because this is about protecting the workers. So those conversations are happening. They are working to get safeguards in, but like anything, it's going to be a compromise solution. One thing that is really key here is Congress is operating on some procedural methods so that they don't have to come back in and physically vote. And so that's requiring agreement, and it's requiring a level of unanimous agreement so they don't have to call people in. So what that means is that everything we're going to see is going to be an effect of those negotiations between both houses and both parties.
Great, thank you. That's all I have.
Anybody else in the queue? I have one question. Okay, on the rate assistance piece, Marlene, we have been clear that I know at the state level there's been some continuing confusion that not all utilities are regulated by the Public Utilities Commission, and hopefully we've cleared that up. But at the federal level, I just want to make sure: is there clarity that it's water as well as electric? I mean, how is utilities being defined? I guess, and then in terms of the assistance, is there a discussion about the method for managing that, money? Like, could we use it to backfill our increased customer assistance, or pay for the, getting people back on their, relieving them of their, past payment obligations, et cetera? Or is it going to be more of a, X amount of money for everybody that makes less than, Y amount?
So starting with the clarity on utilities, the answer is yes. It's been very clear that water and wastewater is part of this mix. And water and wastewater are public agencies. So that has been really leading the conversation about what utilities we're talking about. And on the methodology piece, it's been a mixture of conversations. A few days ago, it was the money's going to be distributed to individuals by the federal government. Then it was the money's going to come to the utilities. And then it was, we're not really sure. We're trying to figure this out. So there's an agreement that, yes, they need to provide it. There seems to be an agreement that they seem to be, I'll put it this way, it seems to be they're close to an agreement that this will go in. They're not there yet. I can't guarantee any of this, but this one is getting probably the most chatter. But the methodology has not been finalized.
I mean, it'd obviously be very helpful if, in addition to whatever direct assistance was provided to individuals, we were able to cover some of our costs that we've been basically forgiving or suspending, during this period.
And relative to that, President Young, that cost is something that is driving us to really try to push on this COVID relief fund, and really raising the profile of, hey, water utilities, wastewater, we're on the front line here. This is a virus that requires water to fight it, and our workers are front and center. and our ratepayers are suffering. We've got businesses not operating. We've got people that can't pay the bills. It's likely to get worse before it gets better. And we need direct assistance just like cities and counties do. And so if the low income doesn't satisfy that, we're hopeful that there's something in this relief fund approach, but I have to say the reality check there is there's so much competition. And as the legislature starts their hearings and says, hey, we need to know where all this money's going on COVID, and we want a hand in how any federal money gets distributed, it becomes harder and harder and harder to be heard. So all we can do is keep messaging and doing our best.
Yep. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. There's no action on this item, but are there any comments, public comments? Okay, we will move on then to item 12, which is considering the introduction and first reading of an ordinance about our retirement system. This will be presented by Lisa Serrani. Lisa?
Hello, Director Young, thank you. Sounds a little noisy. Okay, we are here today to do a first reading. Sorry, accidental mute. We're here today to do a first reading on a consideration of an amendment to our East Bay MUD Retirement System Ordinance, Section 5D. And, all right, there we go. So, whoops, we just lost this slides.
It's one continuous run, Lisa, so it's right after. Just click one time. There you go.
Thank you very much, Risha. Okay, Section 5D of the Retirement Ordinance excludes membership of an appointee to the general manager position who is not already a member at the time of appointment. The last time that this was updated was in 1991, and prior to 1991, Section 5D allowed all newly appointed general managers to become a member without exception. Since that time that the language was changed in 1991, there have been 3 new general managers hired. 2 were internal promotions, and 1 was an external appointee. So we're looking at this language today, really, because in December 2019, the current general manager announced his intent to retire. We are in the midst of a recruitment to fill that general manager position, and we currently have external qualified applicants who are not current members of the retirement system, as well as internal candidates for the position. So an amendment to Section 5D would be required in order to allow retirement system membership to all of the current qualified candidates. In order to consider a change to the retirement ordinance that could also have financial impact to the retirement system requires a review by our actuaries. Our actuaries have reviewed the impact of making this change to the ordinance and determined that it would not exceed 0.5% of the retirement fund's future costs. So we've done this before many times, but as a reminder, the steps to finalize an adoption of a change to the retirement ordinance require this first reading that we're taking today on April 14th, 2020, a second reading, and then a vote to adopt on April 28th, 2020, our next board meeting. After that, the retirement amendment must be placed in the newspaper for 2 successive weeks. And after that, the adoption of the amendment will take effect 31 days after your vote to adopt on April 28th. then staff will publish and distribute copies of the revised ordinance by June 30, 2020. And that is the end of the first reading. Thank you.
Okay, are there questions or comments from members of the board? I will say I think that everybody that works for us should be on the same playing field and therefore become members of the system. So that's where I'm coming from on this. Nobody else?
And I concur with Marguerite.
I'll move approval of the ordinance first reading.
Okay, I don't know.
No, we don't need to do anything.
I don't think we actually have an action.
Right, you adopted the second reading.
This is just from first reading.
Thank you, that is correct.
Okay. It'll be up before us at our next meeting. Are there any members of the public that care to comment on this item? Hearing none, we will move on. Thank you, Lisa. We will move on to the general manager's report. Alex?
Yeah, so we have several items. The first is going to be a coronavirus update that Clifford Chan, Director of O&M, will provide.
Podium's on mute, Alex.
Got it. Speak, Clifford.
Can people hear me? Oh, yes. So there's been a lot
Lisa, you may still have to return control.
What's wrong?
Or something. Alex, you guys are still on mute.
No, we can hear it.
Can you hear me?
So hold on. Let me do this.
On mute. Oh, yeah.
Let me do this. All right, there you go.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So there are a lot of activities going on with our response, and today I'm going to focus on the status of our disinfection and PPE supplies, activities related to how we're addressing customers who are having difficulty paying their bills, and what the financial impact of the coronavirus is going to be on the district. So I would say overall, we're doing well on the disinfection supplies. We have plenty of disinfectant soap. Thank you to our wastewater staff for producing large batches of spray hand sanitizer. We have plenty of gloves in stock in all different sizes. We do have a limited supply of the N95 masks, and those are being reserved for staff performing tasks where N95 masks would typically be used. So, for example, the wastewater operators, and then any other activity that might generate a lot of dust. Now, the California Department of Public Health did put out guidelines recommending that people do wear masks. They don't want people to be using the N95 type of masks. Right now, this is voluntary, but as you can imagine, this makes buying any type of mask at this time quite difficult. Purchasing any type of mask quite difficult. We did yesterday get hundreds of bandanas that we'll be sharing with staff, and then we're going to be distributing it to staff along with directions that the CDC put together on how to make your own masks. And then we're also expecting hundreds of other masks to be arriving this week, as well as in the weeks going forward. We do have orders for all these supplies from soap, gloves, disinfectant, and masks for many weeks going forward, because we do expect that we're going to need these supplies well beyond when the shelter-in-place order is lifted. This table here summarizes the customers that we've restored water service to or provided financial assistance. If you look at the first row, we have all but 22 customers where we restored service. If you remember, we started with 500. We've also granted payment plans or extensions to 2,790 customers, waived late fees for 153 customers, as well as withheld 48-hour notices for around 7,200 customers. Since March 12th, we have accumulated approximately $100,000 in late payment penalties. And then we've also seen an increase in our CAP participation. In March, we're at 7,200 participants. Compared to January, we're around 7,000. We do expect that to increase in the coming months. We're also tracking how the shelter in place and the pandemic is going to affect our water demand. So what you see here is a graph that shows our 2020 water demands on top of our water demands from last year, from the period February through April. And you can see that we're still in our wintertime low demands. On top of this, you'll see the precipitation data, and a lot of the depressed water demand that we're seeing is partly because of the rains that we've had in March. And then superimposed on top of this are the 2 shelter-in-place orders. So we do expect that there's going to be some change in water demand because of the shelter-in-place order, but right now it's still a little too early to see what that full impact is going to be. These 3 pie charts show the breakdown of water use by customer business class on an annual basis for the wintertime and for the summertime. We do expect that we'll see a decrease in commercial and institutional water use. Institutional includes schools and universities. It's also important to note that 90% of our accounts are residential. That's single family and multifamily, and residential accounts for more than 65% of our total water consumption. But because we do have monthly billing, it's going to take a little longer to understand how those trends affect any particular business class that we have. As far as the budget goes, in February, we did, at the semi-annual budget update, we did project that revenues would be above budget and expenses would be below budget. That would be positive around $40 million. We've looked at those numbers again for FY20, and we think that projection is closer to $30 million. But we do expect that in FY21, we're going to see a greater impact on the budget, and I'll talk about some of those reasons in a slide or two. As far as the development impact in FY19, FY20, we did exceed our budget for both SECs and wastewater capacity charges fees. But we do expect in FY21 that we're going to see a slowdown to the regional economy, and that will reduce our SECs and the capacity fees as well. So as far as the fiscal impacts, here are a few of the items that could affect our finances. Certainly the economic impacts in our service area, lower water demands, increased delinquencies, and decreased development. Like I mentioned earlier, it's still too early to measure what those impacts will be. And we do expect that the impact on FY21 budget is going to be greater than on the FY20. We'll be providing more information on the financial impact at the April 28th Finance and Admin Committee meeting, as well as the May 26th Financial Stability Workshop. I'll just close. We did submit a request for expedited funding to FEMA a couple of days ago. I will say that that process is somewhat confusing. There is a training that's going on today that staff is participating in. Some areas where we might be able to get reimbursement include our emergency operations costs, sheltering costs, as well as our response costs. But again, it's somewhat of a confusing process, so we will find out more on what is actually reimbursable in the days to come. So with that, I can take any questions.
Are there any questions from members of the board? Are there any questions or comments from members of the public? Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Clifford, for.
I was kind of formulating a question.
Clifford, okay, go ahead.
We do have the last slide again. I was just kind of trying to understand the reimbursement and what that was for, or what the requests were to. Again, the FEMA reimbursement is different from the Cal OES, or
No, the FEMA coordinates with Cal OES on for the reimbursement.
Okay. Oh, all right. So I didn't get down to the last part of this slide here. What it's for? It actually says their operation. Okay. That's all I needed to see. Are we going to be able to get copies of these slides, or are they? I guess when they're posted, right?
They're on the web already.
They're on the website already.
Oh, they are. Oh, okay. That's great. I checked earlier today. I didn't see it. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Clifford, for keeping us on top of everything. It's obviously a fluid, no pun intended, situation that we'll keep working to adaptively manage. So with that, I think we have Dave Briggs up with our water supply update, which has gotten better. I'm guessing. I know.
Good afternoon, President Young and members of the board. Yes, it has gotten better, and Risha, I want to follow your instructions here and do the right thing with advancing the slides. Is that okay? Great. I did it. So yes, we'll give you the latest numbers after a dry winter and a very dry February. We've had several systems move through in the last 4 to 6 weeks, which have improved our situation. So we'll get you the latest numbers and give you some statewide perspective, and then end with some projections. So I'm on slide 3 now, if you're following along. This is the water production slide, and as Clifford was just mentioning, we'll make some comments about how demand has changed in the last few weeks as a result of the shelter in place. But just taking a step back and looking sort of macroscopically, demand and production was following very closely for the first 7 months of the year. We got to a very dry February. Production increased significantly, and then as the weather turned wet and colder, it came back down to last year's line, which is shown in green. So it's very hard to tease out effects from the shelter in place when you have these larger factors in play related to outside irrigation and the weather locally. As we project to the extent we can, statistically for the end of the fiscal year, we're projecting about 168 million gallons per day on average, which is a couple percent above last year. This is slide 4, and we're looking at the upcountry precipitation, which is still about 72% of average. March ended up pretty good, ended up above average in March. And April, we might reach average in April. We are expecting a few more tenths in the extended forecast for upcountry, which might get us to average. That'll get us to about April 24th or so, with maybe a week or half week left in the month of April. So to the extent we can see in 2 weeks out, not expecting any substantial changes. And at this point, we're in the second week of April, and we have completed the runoff forecast for the watershed, and the McKellamey water year type has been designated as dry, and that comes out of a runoff forecast produced from the Department of Water Resources, which usually depends on an April 1st or early April snow survey, which, just as a footnote, had to be done, actually it was not done, and the calculation had to be done with indirect methods because due to shelter in place, the folks that typically help with the snow surveys were not available. So we were a little nervous when DWR made this calculation with indirect methods that it was going to result in a water year type for the McKellamey, which then cascades into the releases below Comanche for the rest of the water year. We were a little bit nervous that of what methods DWR was going to use, but we made a side calculation, and DWR's calculation was actually pretty close in line with ours. And so that's where we have it. We're in a dry year index now for the rest of the year on the McKellamey. And locally, slide 5, our precipitation still far below average at 45%, and again, nothing much we see in the next 10 days that would substantially change this. The interesting thing is that a lot of the storms that tracked through the Bay Area over the winter and in the spring have tended to come to the south across Santa Clara County. touching us a little bit. That's different. Normally, we see more storms track across Marin County and touch on us from the north. So Marin County is actually doing much worse than we are, and Santa Clara County, relative to average, is doing a little better. So our depth of snow is the one hydrologic indicator that we have right now that's actually above normal, and this also speaks to the fact that we typically use a wide variety of indicators to get a comprehensive look at our water supply picture in the watershed. So with the storm events that came through in mid-March and early April, that added about 4 or 5 feet of depth to our snowpack, well above average at this point. That snow is not very dense, so you'll see shortly the water content of that is not above normal, but still has improved significantly. This is an image here shown with remote satellite sensing of water content in the Sierra. And you can see a little over a month ago, not a lot of snow in the central and northern Sierra. Substantially different about a week ago when the last storm rolled through. But taking a step back, if you were to look at an image, water content in the Sierra in a wet year, you would see most of Northern California above 2,000 feet would be brightly colored in shades of purple here with snowpack. So even though the snowpack greatly improved over the last month, in the grand scheme of things, it is not a very impressive snowpack all in all. So looking at some of our numbers, as I mentioned, depth-wise, we're 126% of normal, but because of the density of the snowpack, we're only 88% in terms of water content. To mind you, the first report I think we gave in March, that number was water content was 50%, maybe a little above 50%. So we're still below average, but we are far better than we were about a month ago. And then looking at storage, over the past 2 or 3 months or so, our storage has really been invariant between 590,000 acre feet and a little bit over 600,000 over the past 6 or 8, 10 weeks or so. And looking forward, projecting, our storage, if we get in a wetter scenario, we might be able to fill our storage, projecting forward, depending on how wet it is for the rest of the spring. But really, as you'll see...
Participant lines muted.
As you'll see from the last slide, I think that this really is the only significant question that remains is what our carryover storage will be at the end of the year. So in wetter condition, we'll fill in the summer. We might have a full storage going into next year, but more than likely we'll probably be below roll curve as we begin next winter. Inflow into Part E right now still remains very low for springtime. I think we peaked out at about 1,500 CFS a few days ago. 1,500 cubic feet per second, which is rather low for a springtime runoff. Statewide, we can see here, this is slide 10, where we show the snowpack up and down the Sierra. This was 10 or 15 percentage points lower earlier in March. Now we're in the upper 50s, upper 60s for much of the Sierra. And the State Water Project has still not updated their allocation for its contractors, just to give you some statewide perspective. That usually is given in the first or second week of April. That's been delayed until, I believe, April 21st. Southern California has been receiving above average rainfall. That might affect the call for water from Metropolitan, or the state just might be behind with COVID-19 related staffing issues. But the state water contractors are sitting on a 15% allocation right now and awaiting an update from DWR. So to round off, back returning now to our situation, we're sitting on a little over 30 inches of precipitation in our watershed, and projecting forward with the hydrologies that we can have between wet and dry for the remainder of the water, you can see that there's not a huge amount in play in terms of how much precip we'll end up with in the McElney watershed. A difference of probably 8 inches or so between a drier spring and a wetter spring, which is not going to move the needle much in terms of how we characterize this year. We're going to end up somewhere between our driest year on record and an average year, somewhere in there. But even though that won't change the amount, that precipitation won't substantially change how we characterize this year in terms of precipitation, that amount of precipitation that's still in play could actually make a big difference in our carryover storage, and this will be the point that I'll end on. So between a wet and a dry hydrology, so we're looking now at slide 12, we're sitting on about 590 600,000 acre feet of total system-wide storage. And if we project this for the rest of the water year, dry will end up at 550,000 acre feet of carryover storage. A wetter hydrology will end up at 630,000 acre feet of carryover storage. And if you look at July, that difference is about 130,000 acre feet. That's a lot of water. So even though there's not much precipitation left to come, that could make a substantial difference in terms of our storage. And then at the end of the year, that's still about 80,000 acre feet of carryover storage. That's a big deal. So there's still a lot in play in terms of our carryover storage, even though the amount of precipitation is really not that much. So I will end you with that picture and be happy to entertain any questions.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Are there any questions from board members? Okay, we will move on to Alex.
Right. I would just, in concluding on that last presentation, so the board will be asked to consider the annual water supply availability deficiency report at the next board meeting. And also in your materials are the monthly report. I can work to answer any questions if you have them. Otherwise, that's all we have.
Okay, questions from board members? Okay, we'll now move on to reports and director comments. The March 24th Finance and Administration minutes were included in the packets. We'll now take reports from this morning's Planning Committee and the Ledge HR Committee. So for planning, that would be Director Linney.
Yes, I want to report that this morning the Planning Committee met at 8:45 a.m. We had 3 items. We went over the McCollum Fall Run Chinook salmon and steelhead returns. We also received reports on the water quality program annual update and the regulatory compliance semi-annual report. There were no votes taken. They were all just reports.
Okay. And from the Ledge HR Committee, I know we heard Ledge earlier today, but Director Coleman, do you have any additional to report?
All three of us met. We approved 2 of the items 1 and 3 that were on the Ledge Committee, which dealt with the diversity inclusion agreement as well as our legislative update. We heard the diversity inclusion program update, and we had a report from the electrical engineer recruitment efforts and Honeywell staffing update as well. And we accepted all the reports.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, if to other items for future consideration. If you have items for future consideration, please submit them promptly to the general manager. And then we'll move on to item 16, director comments. Are there any directors who wish to make comments?
Nope.
Okay, hearing none. I know everybody is hoping for our shelter in place to continue delivering results for all of our ratepayers and our workforce to stay healthy. We are definitely bending the curve, and it's great to hear that. I think only we really haven't seen the impact on our workforce in terms of illness, which is great. We will now adjourn, and our next meeting will be held on April 28th, 2020, at 1:15 p.m. with committee meetings happening prior to that. Thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your week.
Thank you.
Marguerite. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye now.